The last box of my grandmother's possessions sat accusingly on my kitchen table. 3 months after her funeral, I had finally cleared out her small apartment, distributing furniture to relatives, donating clothes to charity, and sorting through decades of accumulated memories. Everything had been dealt with except this final cardboard box labeled simply personal. My name is Michael Chin, 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought my grandmother was just a quiet, frugal woman who had immigrated from China in her youth, worked as a seamstress for 40 years, and lived a modest, unremarkable life. She had raised my father alone after my grandfather died young, and then helped raise me after my parents' divorce. Kind but reserved, she spoke little of her past and asked few questions about my life. When she died at 87, the funeral was small, just family and a handful of neighbors from her apartment building. My father had died 2 years earlier, and there were no other relatives except a few distant cousins. Her life seemed to have left little impression on the world beyond our small family. Or so I thought. I poured myself a glass of wine and finally opened the box. Inside were old photographs, handwritten letters in Chinese, a small jade pendant, and several notebooks. At the bottom was a worn leather portfolio, its surface cracked with age. I opened it to find hundreds of newspaper clippings, dating back to the 1970s. They were in both English and Chinese, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Confused, I began to read. Local seamstress helps refugee family reunite. Chinese immigrant creates scholarship fund for newcomers. Silent hero provides housing for homeless families. Each article detailed acts of extraordinary generosity and activism, all attributed to anonymous donors or community groups. But in the margins of each clipping, my grandmother had made small notations in her precise handwriting, dates, amounts, names. My hands trembling, I turned to the notebooks. Inside were meticulous records, money saved, investments made, and funds distributed. Page after page documented small but consistent financial gifts to families, organizations, and causes. The amount started tiny in the 1960s, $5 here, $10 there, but grew over decades as her careful investments flourished. Stunned, I calculated roughly, my grandmother, who darned her socks and refused to buy a new television, had given away over $300,000 during her lifetime. I was still trying to process this discovery when my doorbell rang. Answering it, I found an elderly man in his 70s, leaning slightly on a cane. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said with a slight accent. "My name is David Park. I've been trying to locate the family of Lin Chin." "That was my grandmother," I said, surprised. "She passed away 3 months ago." His face fell. "I've only just found out. I've been overseas." He hesitated. "May I come in? There's something I need to tell you about her." I led him to the kitchen, where the contents of the box were spread across the table. He glanced at them and smiled sadly. "So you've discovered her secret." "I'm still figuring it out," I admitted. "Who are you?" 50 years ago, I came to this country with nothing. My family had escaped political persecution in Korea, but we were separated during our journey. I had no money, no English, and no hope of finding them." He pointed to one of the newspaper clippings about reunited refugee families. "Your grandmother found me sleeping in a park near her apartment. Instead of calling the police, she brought me food. Then she helped me find work in the garment factory where she sewed. And then, using contacts in the Korean community, she helped me locate my parents and sister, who had ended up in Canada. She paid for their travel to join me here." I stared at him in disbelief. "My grandmother did this? But she never mentioned you. She never spoke of any of us," he said, gesturing to the clippings. "That was her way. She believed that charity done for recognition wasn't charity at all." David reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I've spent 50 years trying to repay her kindness. She would never accept anything from me except friendship. When I became successful in real estate, I tried to buy her a house. She refused. I offered to pay for your father's college education. She refused that too." He placed the envelope on the table. "She only agreed to let me do one thing, contribute to what she called her legacy fund. She made me promise never to tell anyone during her lifetime." Inside the envelope was a bank statement for an account in my grandmother's name, with a balance of just over $2 million. "This can't be right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "My grandmother lived on Social Security. She bought day-old bread to save money, and gave everything else away," David finished. "But she wasn't just giving her own money. She became quite skilled at finding others who wanted to help but didn't know how. She pooled resources, found worthy causes, and kept everyone's contributions anonymous, including her own." As evening fell, my living room filled with strangers, people who had been arriving steadily since David made some calls. A middle-aged woman who had received a scholarship to medical school, an elderly couple whose small business had been saved by a timely loan, a young man who had been homeless until someone had paid his deposit on an apartment. Each had a story about my grandmother's help, offered quietly and without expectation of recognition or gratitude. Each had been sworn to secrecy during her lifetime, and each had been profoundly changed by her intervention. "We called ourselves Lynn's List," explained Sarah, the doctor. "She would let us know when someone needed help, and we would contribute what we could. The more successful we became, the more we could give back." "But why keep it secret from family?" I asked, still trying to reconcile this hidden life with the quiet woman who had taught me to make dumplings and checked my homework. "A month before she died, she asked me to give you this if anything happened to her," David said, handing me a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandmother's familiar script. I opened it with shaking hands. "My dear Michael, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and David has finally revealed what I could not tell you myself. Forgive an old woman her secrets. When I came to this country, I had nothing but the jade pendant you will find among my things. It was the only valuable I managed to bring when I fled China during the revolution. A kind woman helped me when I arrived. Expecting nothing in return, I promised myself I would honor her memory by doing the same for others. I began small, a few dollars saved from mending clothes, offered to a hungry family in our building. The joy it gave me was worth more than any luxury I denied myself. Over time, others joined me in this quiet work. Why did I keep this from you and your father? Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps fear that you would think me foolish for living simply while giving away what could have been your inheritance. Or perhaps I wanted you to love me for who I was to you, not for what I did for others. The legacy fund that David manages is now yours to continue or use as you see fit. These people, my other family, will help you understand how it works, if you choose to continue it. Remember that the greatest wealth is not what we keep, but what we give away with love. Your grandmother, Lynn." I looked up at the circle of faces, strangers who had known a side of my grandmother I never glimpsed. "I don't understand. She could have told me. She could have lived more comfortably." Sarah took my hand. "She lived exactly as she wanted. She found joy in her work, and she protected you from the burden of her expectations. The choice to continue is yours alone." That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone with my grandmother's legacy, both the material one in the bank account and the greater one represented by the lives she had touched. I examined the jade pendant, finally understanding why she had worn it every day but refused to sell it even when money was tight. In the morning, I called my office and requested a leave of absence. Then I called David. "I want to understand everything," I told him. "I want to know how this works." Over the next few weeks, I met dozens of people whose lives had been changed by my grandmother's quiet intervention. I reviewed the careful records she had kept of contributions and disbursements. I visited community centers, scholarship recipients, and small businesses that existed because of her network of giving. 6 months later, I stood in front of a small gathering in a community center named for my grandmother, a tribute she would have hated but which the neighborhood had insisted upon. The Lynch and Community Center would serve as a hub for immigrant services, educational programs, and emergency assistance. My grandmother believed that true generosity requires no recognition. I told the assembled group of contributors and recipients of her legacy. She lived simply so others could simply live. She gave quietly so the focus would remain on those in need, not on herself as the giver. I fingered the jade pendant, now hanging around my neck. For most of my life, I thought I knew her. I saw her thrift as deprivation, her quietness as emotional distance. I never imagined that while she was teaching me to save pennies, she was teaching others how to rebuild their lives. While she was quietly listening to my small problems, she was solving life-changing ones for strangers. I looked around at the faces, some familiar now, others still unknown. The fund my grandmother established will continue, the network she built will grow, and her method, of quiet, dignified assistance that honors the recipient's pride, will remain our guiding principle. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me, hesitant and nervous. "Mr. Chen, I don't know if I belong here, but your grandmother helped my family 10 years ago when we first arrived from Venezuela. I just graduated from nursing school, and I heard about what you're doing. I'd like to join Lynn's List, if that's possible." I smiled, feeling a connection to my grandmother that transcended her death. "Tell me your story," I said, "and then let's talk about who else we can help." That evening, I returned to my apartment and picked up one of my grandmother's notebooks. Inside the front cover, I found a quote she had written in both Chinese and English. "A truly generous person gives quietly, seeks no praise, and keeps no record except to ensure that help goes where it is most needed. Beneath it, she had written, "My legacy is not what I leave to my family, but what my family leaves to the world." I added my own line below hers, "I understand now, grandmother, and I will continue what you began." 1 year after her death, the modest fund my grandmother had nurtured had nearly doubled, as those she had helped contributed what they could to help others. The quiet network she had built now extended to 3 additional cities, with plans for more. And I, who had once pursued success in corporate finance, had found purpose in continuing her work, living simply in her old apartment, wearing her jade pendant as a reminder of promises kept and kindness multiplied. My grandmother had lived 2 lives, the simple one I thought I knew, and the extraordinary one she kept hidden. Her true wealth had never been in her bank account but in the ripples of kindness she had sent out into the world. Some legacies are written in stone or praised in eulogies, but the most powerful ones often go unnoticed, changing lives quietly, one act of kindness at a time. In choosing to live simply so she could give generously, my grandmother had not diminished her life but expanded it immeasurably, and in discovering her secret, I had found not just her legacy, but my own path forward. The greatest inheritance, she had written in her final notebook entry, is the knowledge that you have made someone else's burden lighter. That inheritance, I had finally received.